right. Welcome to Beneath the Helmet. I'm your host, Arjuna George. Welcome to another great episode. Today, I get a chance to sit down with Dr. Rita Brock. She's the director of Volunteers America, the Shea Moral Injury Institute. She's going to share a lot of her wisdom about what moral injury is, moral distress, and also the key word that I think many of us are very familiar with is administrative betrayal. We're going to dive into what that is, what it looks like, how we can maneuver and recover from moral injury through the fire service and other areas. It's very prominent in nursing, in healthcare, in first responder agencies, military, as well as many. So we're going to talk about some of the differences, some of the ways that we can address it within the fire service, how we can educate ourselves a little bit more. She's going to share some amazing resources at the end for you to take back to your department and start introducing moral injury as a component we should be more aware of in the fire service. So I hope you enjoy this great episode and sit back, relax, and until next time, stay well.
It's time to ignite your soul and unlock your full potential. Join us on Beneath the Helmet, the podcast exploring firefighters' health and wellness. Hosted by retired Fire Chief Arjuna George, our podcast is the perfect place to start your journey towards becoming the best version of yourself. So come on, let's join the conversation and find out what sets your soul on fire.
All right, welcome back, everyone. You're in for a real treat today. I got Dr. Rita Brock on the air today. So welcome to the show, Rita.
Thank you. It's great to be with you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I've listened to a few of your podcasts and other shows, and it's great information that you're sharing. So I'm so happy to have you on the show today. So tell us a little bit about who you are, kind of your life up until this point of who Dr. Rita Brock is and what made you go into this world of helping with first responders.
I had quite a long life, so I'm going to give you the short version.
Sounds great.
I grew up for 5 years in Japan. I was raised in an extended family where my grandfather was a Buddhist priest, and then I was sort of plopped into a military base in Kansas, in the middle of the United States, and grew up with a stepfather who was in the U.S. military. And I didn't know he was a stepfather; he was just passed off as my father. So I grew up with a dad who had been a World War II veteran, and came home pretty in messed up. He was sort of catatonic for about 6 months, but the family pulled him together and he recovered. And so then that's how he went to Japan and met my mother. And he was, I would say a good, a good father. He wasn't perfect, but he was reliable and stable. And I grew up that way in the U.S. military. And then he went to Vietnam when I was 16. He was sent and did 2 tours and came home pretty radically changed in a way that I didn't like being around him. And I had just finished high school and was off to college. And basically, I just chose not to be home very much. And so that lasted 8 years, and then he died. So now that I've worked on this thing called moral injury, I have an understanding of what changed him. But I didn't for years. I was just sort of vaguely estranged from going home to my family because he was around. So it affected me that way. But I went to college to be a neurosurgeon and got involved in the civil rights movement, social justice things, and science started to look less interesting than other things. And I actually wound up studying religion because of the civil rights movement. There was a lot of church activity around the civil rights movement, and that puzzled me, and I was interested in it. And I had grown up vaguely Protestant in the U.S. military, and then had a Baptist minister in high school briefly, who was just a lovely guy. He was just a really good minister, but the theology didn't sit with me. I didn't want to go anywhere at the afterlife if my Japanese grandparents were going to be there, and they were Buddhists. So my whole Japanese family was something else than Christian. So anyway, so I wasn't very interested in religion until the civil rights movement happened to me in college. And then I saw this long 2,000-year legacy of people protesting injustice and challenging kings and empires and all that sort of thing. And so I got interested in religion. And then one of my professors, one of my favorite professors, talked me into graduate school in religion. I didn't know what I was going to do with a BA in religion. He said to me, well, you need a graduate degree, so why don't you just go on? So I did, and it got more and more interesting. And so I wound up getting a doctorate in theology and philosophy of religion that had a strong world religion component in it, because I was, of course, fascinated that I had this Buddhist background, but also just fascinated by the human phenomenon of religion. And so I wound up getting a doctorate in it, was a professor for a long time, also with teaching women's studies and Asian American studies and things like that. And sort of burned out on teaching. I did 18 years of it and decided to become an administrator, did an amazing job at Harvard for a while with professional women. That was like an education in everything important. And all these women were doing amazing things, and I got to learn about them. Then I worked for myself for 10 years. I sort of tired of the world of academia and that sort of thing, and did some activist work and then became a professional editor, and did some things like that. And then this idea of in the U.S., the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan started to get unpopular and kept grinding on. And I opposed them from the beginning, but it seemed hard to stop them. The peace movement wasn't having much impact. And so a friend and I decided maybe we should have a truth commission on conscience in war. Because so many veterans experience conflicts of conscience when they get sent to wars, even from World War II. What's called the good war. Even if it seems like a just cause, it's hard on people to kill other people. So we did that, and that's when we discovered this concept of moral injury. Just before our hearing, the people in Boston that had put together an essay sent us a pre-publication version, because they thought it should inform our deliberations. And it was really a groundbreaking piece of writing for the 100 commissioners we had. That they were both profoundly moved by the essay, and it brought the pacifists and the just war folks together around the question of morality in war, because just war folks and pacifists have moral questions about war. And I remember pacifists saying, we're always asked to come together to debate each other, and what we realize is we agree on 95% of the moral principles. Some of us think just war is impossible, and other people think it is possible. Right. And the pacifists said, we need to repent that we let the U.S. government decide what a pacifist is, and we abandoned our just war friends. So that was when I knew the idea had some kind of transformative value in polarized situations, or in situations where people move beyond their opinions and really get to the heart of things. And so that's what got me hooked on unpacking this and figuring it out and understanding it and researching it. So I got a grant to start an institute that could, at Bard Divinity School, that could do education around it. Especially I thought chaplains and clergy really needed to understand it, because I think it's at its core a spiritual issue.
Yeah, for sure.
That's
what they call it, right?
Not
It's
a
an
mental
injury
health disorder. Yeah, it's not a mental health disorder. It's your conscience actually evaluating something that's pretty awful.
Yeah, injury to the soul.
If you feel bad, it's a sign you're a good person.
Yeah.
That's the paradox of it, right?
Yeah, so true.
The moral suffering of moral injury, the suffering involved, is a sign that the good person in you really wants out, but it's stuck behind this wall of shame and guilt and remorse and outrage and all the intense and difficult and painful feelings that come with moral injury. So that's how I got into the work. And then, I did that for 5 years at the seminary, and I actually had some thoughts about what you could do for it. Like, after all the research I've been doing and teaching people about it, I said, I think recovery could happen this way and this way and this way. But I didn't have a way to test anything. And Volunteers of America, which is a social service organization, it serves 30,000 veterans a year in all these state affiliates that we have. and they were all really interested in moral injury. And so I got the chance talking to the CEO. He was interested in having me come over to create program. So I actually got to create a program that we pilot tested for 2 years that we had researched. We had a research team doing separate from our running the program. They did a really intense study of it, and it worked. It was really helpful. It was actually more successful than I actually hoped it would be. And then the pandemic hit, and we had to stop. So we started to think, well, what could we do online? What could we, in a time when people are panicking and isolated and have no time? If you're a frontline worker, like a first responder, ER doctor, you were working in healthcare worker, just intensely busy, and in a very fearful time. And we realized, well, we're not going to get the kind of time we got with those veterans. This 50-hour program that was the successful one. So we pulled together it was all peer facilitated. So we pulled together the veterans who had been peer facilitators for that program and said, if you only had an hour with people, what would you try to do for them? And they said, well, we think this is helpful. This is helpful. And in an hour, you could get this far. And so we put together a thing called Resilient Strength Time. It's not a long-term recovery program, but it's an intervention that helps people process stuff they're carrying so it isn't such a burden to them. And we started that, and we created a version for veterans. And then we worked with our own healthcare staff and senior care center people and our own staff to get them exposed to it. And then we got funding to start a whole other division for first responders. So we actually have a separate program that we were able to put together a little over 2 years ago for first responders, because that's another population that was being seriously impacted by the pandemic. And I think even if there were no pandemic, there are moral injury issues around the kind of work that first responders have to do. You wind up seeing people at their worst often.
Definitely, 100%.
And it's a tough thing. And in some cases, like in corrections and in law enforcement, there's sanctioned violence where you actually wind up doing things that don't feel so good. And that's that. In that way, it's similar to the experience of some veterans. But it's painful and awful stuff that you have to see, and often there's you go and then there's things you can't do.
Yeah, and that's the
Right?
worst part about moral
It's the
injury, right? When
worst
you have
part of
no
it, yeah.
control. Yeah,
You
when
have
you have no
you have
control.
little control, or
Mhm.
there's nothing good you can do.
Mhm.
The situation is so bad that you try to pick the least worst alternative for people, or they don't want your help. That's the other thing too, is that they're at their worst, and sometimes they're resistant, and yet you still have to do it.
Right.
Right. And so that is emotionally challenging work, not just physically and personally. It's just emotionally challenging work that you have, and you just have to sort of stuff those things and keep going. And as one person once said to me, well, you can bury those feelings, but they don't die.
Yep,
They
100%.
sit in there. They don't die. They just wait.
Yep, become
Wait
more
for
and
a
more
chance.
toxic.
Yep.
Yep.
So that's how I got interested in the work, and
Nice.
how I wound up at the end of this process talking to first responders. One of the other wonderful experiences I've had around that is that I taught an intensive at Union Theological Seminary, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, maybe a little longer than that. And a woman that took the course was the first woman to be a chaplain for the New York Fire Department. And so she got very interested in moral injury. What she said is, it's my lane. It's a chaplain lane. It's not a mental health disorder. It's not a physical problem. it's a spiritual, it's my lane. And so she got really interested in helping to try to do programming around for the New York Fire Department. And she texted me a few weeks ago and said, I've just been made in charge of care for the, so she says, I'm the boss now. We can do some programming.
Oh, great. That's great.
Yeah. So, but I learned a great deal from her one September when I was in New York, and she invited me to spend the day with her on 9/11. And saw what that fire department did on that day to remember 343 dead firefighters who were lost in that. And it's a way that event still haunts the New York Fire Department.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I went down to
and I'm
New York.
sure every fire department has things like that.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Yeah.
And but New York, honestly, it affects all of us in the fire service across North America and the world, really.
Yeah.
September 11th means just as much to me as I'm sure some people in the States, right? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It happened it happened to the World Trade Center, not to the
Yeah.
American.
exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Well, it's
that's how I
great
got
work.
into this work. Yeah,
Yeah, it's great work you're doing. I appreciate that.
And
Great work.
as they say that, if you're in moral pain, it means a good person's in there trying to get out. It's
I like
not
that.
that the pain is horrible, but if you don't deal with it, it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
And what's wonderful about it is if you can actually help people unload some of that, you just meet the most amazing people. They just come alive. I mean, just to watch the miracles that happen when they can let go of that stuff in ways that you're never going to forget it, but it doesn't have to run your life.
Yeah, and just a little short story. I've shared this a few times on the podcast, but the day I decided to take a leave from my job, I went up to my family portrait wall and said, I'm free. Just popped out of my mouth. And that was definitely moral injury speaking, saying, you're free. You're now able to be yourself.
Yeah.
So that was quite a moving moment for sure.
Yeah.
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 So for the people who are listening right now, moral injury, like whenever I go and do talks, workshops, presentations, I talk about moral injury almost every single time.
Oh, that's great.
Very few people ever put their hand up saying they've ever heard of it.
Right.
So how would you describe it in a real easy kind of almost elevator pitch, what moral injury is?
It's what your conscience does to you when you have an experience that just makes you feel like a bad person or angry that somebody did something horrible and you couldn't stop it. That it's basically an affliction of conscience.
Right.
And I believe everyone has a conscience. Some people get it beat out of them and destroyed, but we all start with that because our conscience is how we have relationships, how we are loved and feel safe and good in the world. So when something disrupts that, when it can be as simple as a car accident. Right. I talked to a group of people who formed an association of people who feel terrible because they killed somebody in a car accident. It can be that, or it can be war, or it can be a horrifying crime scene, or whatever, a terrible fire. These are all things we don't have any control over, and bad things happen. And even though we're not responsible, we still feel bad.
Right.
And so that's, every religion understands this. There are rituals that a lot of religions have to help people come to terms with horrifying experiences. And that's something I did in graduate work with study world religions. And so I'm attentive to the fact that religions as pretty much all have a way of talking about that kind of devastation to a human person. And also about systems that do that to people.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's why it marries so well with chaplaincy, right? That marry, yeah. Nice.
Yeah. And we have an educational program at Volunteers of America that's a 10-week, 50-hour certificate in moral injury. And we get a lot of chaplains and clinicians and social workers. We get humanities professors and other people too. But they have to do a capstone project that applies moral injury to their work. And it's so amazing how many areas people can move this into and how creative they can be from all kinds of diverse religious traditions, and also using art. And in the situation of chaplains, you can't be sectarian, you can't promote a particular religion, but you can do really, they come up with the most interesting ways of helping people process moral injury. We had a military chaplain who wanted to help other military chaplains with their own moral injury experiences. And he found a way to do it using Legos. So I was just, when he explained it, I thought, oh my gosh, that's really very creative, but I think it could work.
I'd like to see that, actually.
Yeah. So the it's an ordinary human experience, moral injury. That's the thing. It's not some pathology or some unusual disorder. It's an everyday thing.
Right.
But it's, once it happens to you, it's really hard to process. And no one should try to do it alone.
So saying that, what are some of the things that people listening right now would say, this sounds like me. I'm challenged with some moral injury right now. What would be some of the things that would show up in their lives that would maybe point them in that direction?
Well, if you're feeling miserable and not a good person, or really like angry, upset about something serious, or you don't connect anymore to people you care about, you just don't have the energy to have an emotional connection, you withdraw, you may start drinking to lessen the pain, or use something else to lessen the pain, overwork, like you feel like you don't want to stop working because it's like you're running from it, it'll hit you if you stop. Those are all signs that you should stop. And it's better not to let them get severe. It's like when you begin to experience it, when you start to lose sleep because something's really bothering you, and you can't figure it out, and that will begin to keep you from being your best self at work. It's a good idea to talk to somebody that you know won't judge you, but care. And often that's a chaplain, but it can be anybody. To sort of sort it out, and just explaining it, just telling your story, or even writing it in a journal, is the first step in the processing of the feelings. And once you've got it down, then you can start thinking that it's sort of like there's the memory in your right brain that's a little disorganized and deeply emotional, and and that's your sort of intuitive, disorganized brain. And it's an important part of, because it's where a lot of the feeling, and it's also where trauma happens in your brain. So what you need to do is to get that process organized over into your thinking brain, which is where your conscience is. And if you have moral injury, it's mad at the other side of your brain. It's like that conscience is mad at what happened, and it's mad that it feel all these feelings, and it doesn't want to feel those feelings. So to sort of be able to put those two things together and start to process means you start to reflect on your experience rather than just letting it, the emotions overtake you. And it's just useful to be able to talk to somebody. And that's why we have these rest groups they're facilitated by other first responders. So there's no judging, and they're not there to fix people. They're just there to give people some support for taking that step of realizing they're not alone, that people will believe them, and people will understand. They'll empathize. That's a really good first step. Yeah.
So talking with, a colleague, a peer supporter, a therapist, a clinician, coach, whatever that looks like, as long as you're sharing your story, that's a great way to start off healing from that.
Yeah, and we use groups. The REST program is small groups, and they're facilitated by first responders, and it's just small groups. And we use groups because there's something magical about saying something you've been carrying that's really bothering you, and it feels bad. and you share it, and people go, oh yeah, oh I can understand. That didn't happen to me, but I can understand how you feel. Or oh man, that happened to me too. So you start to feel connected to people. It breaks down the sense that you're the only person that's this bad or in this bad a shape. And it also means that your story is of value to other people. It's not just a burden, it's a value, because people can be empathetic. They can even learn from what you said, or feel connected to you. Just they want to feel connected as well. So there's a way that the group helps everybody feel better. You don't have to do it yourself. In therapy, you have to do it yourself.
Right. Yeah.
Right. But in a group, somehow the whole group carries people forward.
Yeah. Groups are
And
powerful.
they
Groups and
really
peer
are.
support and coaching. And yeah, it's very powerful.
The military knows this. They put people in squads.
Yeah, exactly.
And the squad passes or fails together, right? So
Yep.
they have to get each other through. And I think when people get in a group, they feel that. They feel like, oh, this is somebody I could care about. I need help.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So just for my own clarity, but also I think for the listener right now as well, there's a lot of the signs and symptoms of moral injury that align very closely to PTSD or
Yes.
traumatic stress.
Yeah.
What's the differences there, and maybe what's missing from moral injury or vice versa, PTSD?
Yeah. You can have moral injury and not have PTSD, and you can have PTSD and I mean you can have one or the other, but they often happen together because moral injury is more likely to happen in a traumatizing situation with a lot of fear. But PTSD is basically a fear-based disorder where your right brain is very disorganized because your fear center's overreacting to it's not calming down like it should. And so you might have flashbacks, you might have nightmares, you might be hypervigilant. Those are all symptoms of PTSD, and that is something a good therapist can help with. And it is an awful condition if you have it. You can't function in a normal way. You may not be able to sit with your back to a window, or you might not be able to go into a mall because of too many people. Those are fear responses that are not under your control. And so that's PTSD. And so there are good therapies for that. Moral injury isn't fear-based. It's conscience-based. And the feelings associated that are intense with it are not fear emotions. They're guilt, shame, remorse, outrage. There's anger with PTSD also, but I think the anger is a different source. It's fear has aggression and anger built into it. But moral injury, that anger is about the moral violation. And so there is research that's been done on veterans that shows that if you have both, that if you get time to process your moral injury, as opposed to go to group therapy, you go to a group and talk to a chaplain about moral injury, it actually improves outcomes for PTSD treatment. So moral injury can impede mental health work. And we actually had in our certificate program, we actually had a chaplain who worked at a psychiatric hospital. And she said she had noticed sometimes when people are getting ready to be discharged, they start to feel worse. And what happens is that she said people would get better, and then they'd realize what they'd done in their lives and to their families, and they would get moral injury. They would feel terrible as human beings for having put their families through X, Y, or Z. So her moral injury project was for the people who are going to be discharged, the people who got well, which is a paradox, right?
It's super important, though. Yeah.
It is important that you were not yourself exactly with a mental illness, and then when you come to yourself, you become aware of the trail of harm you left behind. And so she organized a way to help people come to terms with that and just be aware of it and know that it might be happening to them, and how to process it if they need to do that. And so anyway, that says that the two are related, mental health and moral injury, but not in the way you would think, right?
Yep.
Right. So moral injury is, I think, common. It's so common that people carry it all the time, and And sometimes that isn't a bad thing. I mean, if you were feeling betrayed by a system that, like wouldn't let you give the proper care that you think you require for to be a good doctor, but the insurance company won't pay for it, or something like that, you can feel betrayed by a system and be angry about it. And sometimes that anger is then you do something to change the system.
Right. Yeah.
So that is not moral injury is just a human experience. There's ways to turn it to positive good. But if you're being driven by the feelings, you're not going to go there. You're just going to be toxically angry or ashamed or those things. But processing the feelings that are keeping you from being your best self can make you motivated to make change.
Right.
So yeah, I don't think it's good or bad. It just is. It's moral suffering is part of the human condition.
That's for sure.
Yeah.
So why is it that moral injury is not part of the DSM? Like, what's missing to make it qualify for that?
I have a couple of intuitions about that because I studied psychology in college and graduate school as part of the work I did as a theologian. But it's been a couple of 100 years where the ideas of guilt and shame started to be seen as neurotic, as mental health problem, and religion was also seen as often a problem. So there are plenty of people in the therapeutic community that don't know anything about religion, don't like it, or have left it behind because they were harmed by it themselves. Mm-hmm. So they're not very sophisticated in the way they understand the complexities in religion around moral suffering. And when they hear guilt or shame, they want to try to help people get over it. And I know veterans who resent that their guilt and shame makes them feel like better people. Right. So they resent them being stigmatized or pathologized. And so I think that so there's more crossover on moral injury than anything I've ever seen between the chaplains and the psychiatrists. Because the psychiatrists have even, that essay on moral injury that I thought was amazing was done by clinicians who are just scientists, right? They're like, they treat people with diagnoses and protocol. But near the end of the essay, they said, but, we have this process. We think if you're a therapist and you use it with somebody with moral injury, it might be helpful to them, but it's not enough. We really need our communities, even our religious communities, to give people support and help. And that was shocking to me. I couldn't remember ever reading a psychological essay like that where they said religious communities might have value. Right. So it's unusual. It's not impossible. It's not unusual, but it was unusual. So I think that the moral injury actually brought those two things more together. And clinicians are more interested in how chaplains and religious people might do things, but they also want chaplains to be more sophisticated about clinical work also, that there might be things they could do for moral injury that clinicians could also provide. So it's the lines between the two have blurred more. But I think there's still, how would I put it, not a lot of education for people who are going into psychiatry or psychology around moral injury because it's still new enough.
Yep.
That it sort of was sort of slotted into veteran clinicians and everybody else isn't paying attention to it. And now since the pandemic, there have been studies on moral injury in medicine and so now there's even research-based essays that identify it. And I think you're going to find the clinical community more interested in it. But the fact is, and this is why I think the role of chaplains and the peer support stuff that we do is so important. The fact is that there are not enough therapists and psychiatrists right now to take care of people who actually have mental health issues. The wait times for appointments at the VA in some places can be weeks or months. There's just not enough therapists. So the therapists have their own work to do, and it's a really important work. So those of us who work on moral injury can support those who don't actually need a therapist, but they need help. they're suffering morally. But if you spot it as a disorder, then you have to have a therapist. And
Right.
And we use peers. You don't even need a professional in the room, and you can have incredible improvement. Because it's just part of the human condition. We can all help each other. So yeah. So I don't know that we need therapists and clinicians to become experts on moral injury. They just need to know if they got somebody talking in a way that sounds like they have moral injury. They can say, "Oh, well, you might want to go to this group or talk to the chaplain."
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
So you mentioned religion quite a few times.
Yeah.
But from my kind of knowledge of moral injury, it's more of a spiritual thing, and spirituality is a little bit different than religion. Or am I wrong there?
I think there's a lot of overlap.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, Buddhism is a very formally organized religion, but a lot of people think of it as spiritual because it doesn't structure itself around belief.
Right.
It structures itself around practice. So if you do the meditation practice, you will get where you need to go. That they sort of don't care what you believe exactly. Those are just thoughts, and you just let your thoughts flow through, but you don't hang on to them when you meditate. So it's a different approach to what it means to be a religious person in Buddhism. It doesn't mean you believe in particular things. It's that you have reached a state where you are able to handle your suffering in ways that don't inflict it on other people, and that you are compassionate and all of that. And but Christianity also has its spiritual traditions, as does Judaism, they all have practices that ask you to sort of be quiet and listen to your inner self. Right. Prayer is usually what it's called in the monotheistic tradition. But I spent a week once at Rosebud Reservation and participated in sweat lodge ceremony. And it was an amazing experience. I don't know, I can't tell you exactly why it was so an amazing experience, but it was transformative in a way that I still don't know how to explain. And I met a veteran who had been treated by the VA for a number of years for his PTSD, said he found it helpful in managing his symptoms, but he was miserable. And he actually wound up doing a whole sweat lodge ceremonial process with a Lakota healer. And that's what helped him get over his war experience.
Wow.
And he said the healer said to them, "We're doing this process because you need to learn to not want to kill people." And that was a little shocking to him, but he felt it transform his insides in a particular. So I don't. The Lakota tradition is quite ritualized. It's got its way it does things. It has its religious leaders, shaman leaders. So it is a religion, an indigenous religion. They're all these different. I mean, they're different. They're not all the same. Navajo, Lakota, Anishinaabe, but there probably as many versions of Christianity as there are tribal traditions. So I think the idea that people don't like organized religion, but they like spirituality is a little bit too neat a divide.
Right.
A lot of what we call spirituality emerged from some religious tradition, and it had, as my friend Brendan Ozawa de Silva, who runs a Tibetan Buddhist center at Emory, says, Buddhism is easy to secularize. It's easy to teach somebody to mindfully breathe, and they don't have to believe in Buddhism to do it because they're practice oriented. And so we use a lot of those kind of practices in our groups because they're not branded as one religion. And that helps people who aren't religious participate. It helps people who are religious participate. And because we're not interested in, imposing anything religious on people. But we do know that there are practices that come out of religion that are actually beneficial.
Yeah, I think that's important because I think a lot of people might dismiss this kind of work because it's like, oh, I don't want to get into a different religion or religion in general, right? So
we have plenty of atheists for our program and be fine. And they're still atheists. That's fine.
Totally.
In fact, I have a number of very close friends who are atheists, and they teach religion, professors of religion. Oh, you have to believe things that teach them in a sympathetic way.
It's not that they don't believe, they just don't know which one to pick, right?
Well, no, they believe that most of the ones I know who are atheists were taught things from their religious tradition that they came to understand as not true.
Mhm.
And so they just weren't interested in a tradition that prescribed what they needed to think about things. And so they generally are humanists. I think they wind up being sort of humanists. Normally when I meet an atheist, my first question is, oh, and what is the God like that you don't believe in? And they always have some idea of God that they don't believe in, right?
Mhm.
I will say, oh, I don't believe in that God either, but I'm not an atheist.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's good to clarify, because I think that's an important part of this whole, because whenever I bring up moral injury, that definitely the spiritual or religion part comes into it, right? Of
Yeah.
questions around it.
Yeah.
I also have a lot of
It's a
people.
human condition that
Yeah.
we have this core soul or conscience that's profound and connects us to other people, but it's not physical, it's not visible, but it's the most profound way we relate to each other.
I coach a lot of fire chiefs and fire officers across North America, and one of the things that comes up quite often is administrative betrayal.
Oh yeah,
Would you consider that the same thing as moral injury?
it is. It is.
100%
In fact, the
same.
first person in 1994 to use the term moral injury was a psychiatrist at the VA in Boston who was working with Vietnam era veterans, and that was a veteran population that was deeply betrayed by their government. And so, and they were often toxically angry. As somebody said, being angry is a way you think you have control, and it can feel good to be angry a lot. And what he said is that moral injury is the betrayal of what's right in a high-stakes situation by someone in authority. That was his definition. And he can say, and then he sort of, when I asked him about the newer definition of it being perpetrating harm, he said, well, the person in authority can be you. And you betray what's right in a high-stakes situation. He said, but for the veterans he worked with, that they were furious at their government for betraying them, sending them into a war they didn't want to be in, and make them kill people they didn't want to kill.
Yeah,
So,
I think in
yeah.
the fire service, I think that's probably more prominent than, bad fires or car crashes.
Yeah.
That administrative betrayal, and not necessarily just management, but even just interrelational.
Yes. Sub managers that just don't know,
exactly.
and they're also often trapped between. Yeah.
Sandwiched in there.
So systems of power can be quite harmful. They can also be fine, but they can be quite, and a lot, unfortunately, depends on the people doing it.
Yeah.
Inside
sure.
the system. But Wendy Dean, who's a psychiatrist, but who went through the medical system at various stages as trying to be this doctor or that doctor, and finally wound up in psychiatry, wrote a book called If I Betray These Words, about how the medical system in the United States betrays doctors at every step.
Mhm.
And how hard it is to be a doctor today because of the managed care system and insurance companies and all the layers above you that will not let you make the decisions you need to make to make you feel like you're a good doctor.
Yeah, I can totally see that.
Yeah. So there are lots of people now looking at these kind of systems.
Good to know.
Yeah, and there are no perfect systems, so because there are no perfect human beings, and they're all human systems. But it's when people recognize their moral injury and understand that it's caused by a system. That's what I meant about it can be a good thing, in the sense that they then will, if instead of being defeated, they will try to take it on and at least speak out about it and attempt to do something.
So what could we do as a fire service to start addressing this better? Any thoughts you could share with us?
I think number one, talking about it, making sure your chaplains know about it, giving people permission to talk about it, and also having systems where people can raise authority issues and misuse of power issues, not punishing whistleblowers, that kind of thing. Because if the system is harming people and there's no way to fix it, it's going to fall apart eventually.
And that whole whistleblower thing that's a pretty hard thing to put into action, because
Yes,
there's
it
a lot
is.
of
Yeah.
layers there. Yeah.
Yeah. I had a situation once where I was being sort of treated by the person in my direct report with microaggression. So the university actually had an ombudsperson. And so I looked at the faculty manual and realized I could go talk to this person. And I explained the behavior. And she said, yeah, I think you're being subjected to microaggressions. And she said, here are your options. You could file a formal charge that would protect you from retaliation. Or you could do this or that. And I said, well, I don't want to escalate to a formal charge yet. And then I went to my next reporting session with her, and she actually said something that was vaguely threatening. So I went back to her and I said, okay, this is what she said. She said, yeah, she threatened you. She said, what do you want to do? And she said, what, I said, I'm not sure about the charges yet. And she said, well, you could have a mediated conversation with her. And so that's what I agreed to do. I had a mediated conversation with the ombudsperson being the mediator, and the person denied the behavior. And I thought, oh, that this is a deliberate thing. It's not innocent.
Right. You turn it on or off, right?
Yeah. And the ombudsperson, and so we were at a stalemate, and the ombudsperson said, what would you like to do going forward? And I said, I would want someone else in the room every time I meet with her. So that was the solution, because she didn't do it when somebody else was in the room to witness it. But people don't have ways to do that. People don't have some way to get control of a really demoralizing situation. I don't know what I would have done if I hadn't had a good person who knew what to do, who would help me figure out the steps and help me strategize. And eventually the reporting got changed. I just waited it out.
Which probably took a toll on your well-being for sure, right? So
a lot. Now, once I got the other person in the room, the behavior started to change. And then she did something when I wasn't in the room that tried to sabotage me, and it was recognized as not appropriate. So they changed the reporting. So she sort of took herself out. But I've been in situations where I was asked to adjudicate complaints as well.
Right.
When students actually brought the complaint against a professor. And the dean asked me to sit in and work with her on the processing it. And we determined the professor had been abusive.
Right.
Yeah.
So for the listener listening right now, what kind of resources could you share that they could go learn more about what moral injury is, how to prevent it, how to use it for good?
We have a bunch of stuff at our website, voa.org/moral injury, or you can look us up by the Shea Moral, SHAY, Shea Moral Injury Center. Both of those will get you to our website, where we have a whole resources section. And we even have a Zotero bibliography that goes on for hundreds of entries. So research essays for people who are serious about the research. We have a lot of research essays, but we also have movies and books and other things listed there. And you can also go to voa.org/rest, REST, and you can see the online program we have and sign up for a meeting.
So how do people do that? Is it a free, or is there a cost to it?
No, it's confidential. It's free. You sign up for an account. You have to register for an account so they can send you an email reminder of your time. And then when you sign up for an account, you will see the schedule of when the meetings are. And the one for first responders is separate. So if you click on the first responder section of it, you will only see meetings for first responders. And there's several a week. And
on Zoom kind of thing, right?
It's just Zoom. It's like Zoom. It's almost identical to Zoom.
Yeah.
And you get an hour with two facilitators who can run the meeting for you. And sometimes it's one or two people, and sometimes it's 10. It varies a lot, but it's a chance with two people who understand moral injury. The main thing is the facilitators understand moral injury, so they know what they're hearing and they know how to guide people through a difficult emotional experience. I've used it myself sometimes when I felt pretty stressed. Not the first responder one, but the one for the general public.
Right.
That's also if you have family members of first responders who need some support, the one for the general public is helpful.
And is this available worldwide, or?
It's an online, it's virtual.
Yeah, anyone can join.
Totally
Doesn't matter where you live. Yeah. Okay,
doesn't matter where you live. You just have to be able to meet that hour time.
Yep.
And have a computer or a way to show your video. You can't be anonymous and not show your face because it's too hard on the facilitators to facilitate blank screens and voices, right? So we ask you to turn on your camera. And we one time were working with graduate nurses, and there wasn't a safe place in the hospital for a private conversation, so they were doing it in their cars with their phone. So if you don't want people to overhear you, you need a private place. But other than that, that's all you need.
Right.
And you can even use a fake name on the screen. If you don't want your name used, you can just type in a fake name.
Gotcha.
Some people want confidentiality.
Yeah. Right. That's a great resource for sure.
It's very easy to use. And it does require some Wi-Fi bandwidth to show your video. That's it.
Okay.
Yeah.
If you could suggest one resource to really get a clear picture of what moral injury is, what would you recommend?
Wow, that's a great question. There was an essay at the end of September 2020 in Scientific American, and it just said this is moral injury is an epidemic that affects millions. And the reporter interviewed the journalist that wrote that essay interviewed all kinds of people, me and others, and really did a great kind of survey, not only explaining what moral injury is, but people affected by it and what people were doing to help people affected by it. It's a good summary essay. You don't need much more than that. There's also on our website a click through to a video on YouTube we put up that we created that is a 10-minute explanation by one of the original authors of the essay in 2009, was a Navy psychiatrist for 30 years and is an expert on moral injury. And he gives one of the best and clearest explanations in 10 minutes I've ever heard of moral injury.
Okay.
His name is Bill Nash, Nash.
Okay.
And
I'll make sure I add that to the show notes. And if I can find that article, I'll definitely include that as well.
Those two, you know a lot about moral injury. The video with Bill Nash and that scientific article, American article.
Awesome.
It's very funny because people that don't keep up with me but have heard of me, I got emails saying, "Did you know you were in Scientific American?" Like, what is this theologian doing in Scientific American?
Exactly.
Right.
That's awesome. Well, that's a great resource.
Yeah.
So what would be one thing you want to leave our listener with today that you couldn't end this conversation without sharing?
What I would say is, if you think you have moral injury, don't be afraid of the pain in you, because it's a good person wanting out.
Yeah, I love that. I've never heard that kind of framed that way. Because that's truly who I've seen experiencing moral injury are all good people.
Yep. And we want you to come out.
Yep.
We need you.
I love it. Love that.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
So how can people learn more about you and connect with you if they want to in the future?
Oh, well, the same thing. You can go to Shea Moral Injury Center or voa.org/moral injury, and there's a bio of me and a way to get a hold of me. We have a thing you can send an email to.
Okay. Is this a physical location, or is this just a virtual company that's in the?
Well, Volunteers of America is headquartered in Alexandria, Virginia. And then we have 30 affiliate physical offices across the country that work in 45 states. And our work is, we build a lot of affordable housing. We are the third largest builder of affordable housing in the country. I think our housing units, they manage something like 20,000 units or something. So yes, we are physical, but all over. So as a program person for the national office, I can live anywhere, because I have to go to other places. Then I have to go to. So I used to have an office in Alexandria, Virginia, and then when COVID started and I never used it, I thought, well, I guess I could live anywhere then, because I still have to go to New York, LA, Wyoming, just Texas, Florida. We even have an affiliate in Puerto Rico.
So you're moved near MSP Airport, so you can go anywhere, right?
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Because that one pretty much goes every direction.
Yeah. When I lived in Alexandria, it was Reagan Airport. It was like 20 minutes on the metro, and I could go anywhere too.
Nice.
So, it's way too hot in Virginia for me. Yeah.
Awesome. Well, it's been an honor connecting with you and sharing your wisdom and your research over the years. And I think this is an extremely, extremely important topic that I think, like I said, I share it as much as I can. And it's great that we can have another conversation about that today. So.
Yeah. Well, and I just want to say thanks to all those first responders out there listening. I know the work you do is really hard, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
So what does Dr. Brock need more in her life to even increase your wellness before we finish up?
Oh,
this is a question I kind of share is like better sleep.
Better sleep. As you age, that is such a struggle.
Yes.
I used to be a champion sleeper. I could sleep through anything in those 8-9 hours solid through. And I haven't had 8 hours sleep without a break probably in a year. It's just part of the aging process, but it just drives me crazy. And if you're female, it's also like you get the hot flashes too that interrupt your sleep. So anyhow, my wellness is trying to do the best sleep hygiene I can do before I go to bed at night, and then waking up at 2 a.m. and thinking, it didn't work.
Well, sleep is definitely the cornerstone of wellness for sure.
It is
100%.
everything.
Yep.
It is the way your brain revives itself and restores itself overnight. And
great book.
I know bad sleep, I'm foggy brained all day.
Yeah. A great book is Why We Sleep. I don't know if you read that or not, but that is a great book.
I have.
Yeah, a great book.
Yeah. I think I've read everything possible and trying to figure out what is the magic formula for sleeping through the night. And so, I'm
awesome.
I still can function, but I worry. It's also your immune system as well.
Yeah.
So
affects everything.
So that's my wellness.
Good for you. Good. Well, at least you've identified it. Yeah.
Yes.
And now you can work on the steps too.
Yeah. I do. I walk. I do exercise. Try to get morning light. All and still.
Yeah. Well, I know some of my clients have struggled with that, and it turned out to be hormones was the culprit. Yeah. So out of sorts hormones, right? So.
Yeah. Well, that's one of my issues. Is I just finally. They don't let you stay on hormones if you're female and finally I talked to my doctor. I said, I don't have any risk for cancer. And fine. I just need to try the hormones again. So working on that one now. But ashwagandha and these things. For sure. Black cohosh. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, it's been a real honor and pleasure to meet you and connect with you on Beneath the Helmet and sharing your message with our firefighter audience. So much appreciated.
Well, thank you. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. All right. All the best to you. Until next time, everyone, stay well.
Thank you for tuning in to Beneath the Helmet. We hope that this podcast has provided you with valuable insights into the world of firefighters' health and wellness. Remember, caring for your physical, mental, and spiritual well-being is crucial to achieving optimal performance. Join us next time on Beneath the Helmet for more inspiring conversations. Until then, stay well.